One man controls the presidency, parliament, and potentially the future constitution of an entire nation. Protesters are in the streets of Kinshasa. Police and opposition supporters have clashed. The constitutional debate has moved beyond parliament, and the political temperature is rising. The question is, how did Congo arrive here? How did a debate about the constitution become one of the country's most diverse political battles? To truly grasp the political landscape of Kinshasa and what opposition figures describe as the hidden agenda of President Felix Tshisekedi, you must first fully understand this phrase: the sacred union of the nation. So, what is the sacred union? Let's start there. It is not just another standard political party. Instead, political analysts describe it as a massive overarching political alliance. A giant club combining hundreds of politicians and dozens of separate political functions. Every member of this group has agreed to team up for a single unified goal: to completely back and support President Felix Tshisekedi. According to critics, the main purpose of the Sacred Union is to hand President Felix Tshisekedi a broad, unchallenged authority over the country's law and the state government. In a typical health democracy, a president must debate, argue, and negotiate with a diverse parliament to successfully pass the new laws. Observers note that the Sacred Union substantially altered those dynamics because nearly every single political sitting in parliament belongs to the same exclusive club. The president can pass almost any law he wants instantly, whenever he wants. Critics argue that the entire parliament acts like a compliant rubber stamp to instantly approve the president's ideas. Critics argue that the constitutional reform could eventually clear a path for an extension of presidential power. Government supporters reject that claim, arguing that the reforms are intended to modernize state institutions. In the view of the opposition, the legislative bodies function primarily to provide formal approval. To see the real reason this group was built, we have to look back at an intense high-stake political war. When President Felix Tshisekedi first took the oath of office as president in 2019, he held a title but possessed almost no genuine executive power. The previous head of state, Joseph Kabila, still completely dominated the legislative branch of government because his fiercely loyal coalition partners held the vast majority of seats in parliament. Tshisekedi found himself completely trapped in a political marriage, what they call in Kinshasa mariage politique. Kabila's loyal network actively blocked, delayed, or ruined almost every major decision Tshisekedi tried to make. By late 2020, Tshisekedi grew completely exhausted from being a president without real teeth. He decided to play his ultimate trump card. On December 6, 2020, he delivered an explosive high-stake national television address to the entire nation. He openly announced that his old political partnership with Kabila was completely dead. He then issued a fierce direct public threat to every lawmaker in the country: join me and my brand new coalition right now, or I will dissolve this entire parliament and force costly new elections. Opposition members state that lawmakers felt under immense pressure, realizing they could lose everything. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, running a political campaign is incredibly expensive. If Tshisekedi dissolved the parliament, hundreds of MPs would lose their seats, their high-paying salaries, and would lose the money they had already invested. Realizing the political winds had shifted and seeking to protect their positions, hundreds of pro-Kabila's lawmakers abandoned him overnight and crossed over to join the Sacred Union. But the question most people ask is, how were powerful politicians convinced to join the Sacred Union? In Congolese politics, switching sides is an art form. President Tshisekedi did not use military forces to build the Sacred Union. He used a method known in English as carrot and sticks. Simply put, independent monitors define it as mix of rewards and implicit threats. What do we mean by carrot and sticks? The carrot. Think of a donkey that moves because someone is holding a tasty carrot in front of its nose. In politics, this means giving someone money, power, or high-paying job. The stick, think of using a stick to hit an animal if it refuses to move. In politics, this means threatening someone's job, destroying their career, or linking their secrets. He offered carrots to his supporters and used the stick to those who resisted. The official documents of the Sacred Union claim the group exists to promote national peace, foster unity, and lift up the economy. However, several political analysts argue that the coalition functions primarily as a survival mechanism and an instrument of expanding power. Its chief goal, according to observers, was to completely defeat Joseph Kabila without firing a single military bullet. President Tshisekedi successfully accomplished this by swinging that political stick. For anyone who chose to stay fiercely loyal to Kabila, the administration immediately took action. The purge started at the very top with Kabila's loyal Prime Minister, Sylvester Ilunga Ilunkamba. On January 27, 2021, the newly aligned parliament organized an overwhelming vote of no confidence and successfully drew him out of the office. Tshisekedi quickly sought a replacement. That man was Jean-Michel Sama Lukonde. Remember this name, it holds many secrets. Janine Mabunda, she was a highly capable lawyer and the pro-Kabila Speaker of the National Assembly. When Tshisekedi began building the Sacred Union, she fought back and tried to legally block his moves at every turn. Opposition figures describe the move as a political coup within a parliament. Government allies argued it was a lawfully parliamentary vote that led to her removal from office. Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari, the former governor of Maniema and Kabila's hand-picked candidate in the 2018 election, remained intensely loyal to his old boss, because he openly criticized and tried to block the Sacred Union's plans. State authorities quickly targeted and arrested him. Joseph Kabila, the main target, the former president himself was systematically stripped of all authority. The Sacred Union dominated parliament officially removed his lifetime legal immunity. His political party, the PPRD, was forcefully shut down and banned. Later, a military court sentenced Kabila to death in absentia after accusing him of high treason and supporting rebel groups. Following the verdicts, the state officially seized all of his domestic businesses and financial assets. While those who resisted the Sacred Union felt the heavy blow of the government stick, the politicians who helped President Tshisekedi break Kabila's grip were rewarded with massive carrots. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, regional alliances are incredibly powerful, and Tshisekedi used high-ranked jobs and state funds along with control over rich mining assets. This allowed him to lock in the absolute loyalty of influential regional bosses. Vital Kamerhe, Tshisekedi's former chief of staff, served complex legal tropes after being accused of embezzlement. By aligning completely with the Sacred Union, he was rewarded by being elected Speaker of the National Assembly. Jean-Pierre Bemba, a powerful former rebel leader and a vice president who had been a fierce opposition figure. By crossing over to the Sacred Union, he was rewarded with the influential position of Defense Minister, giving him direct control over national military resources. The biggest carrot of all was given to Jean-Michel Sama Lukonde. Within the pro-Katanga, many do not hesitate to call this man a traitor. Sama Lukonde is a fellow son of Katanga, the resource-rich province that served as Joseph Kabila's absolute home stronghold. Kabila was the one who brought Lukonde into national politics, promoting him to Minister of Sports back in 2014. When Tshisekedi fired the pro-Kabila Prime Minister, Sylvester Ilunga Ilunkamba, who was also from Katanga, he faced a dangerous problem. To prevent the people of Katanga from becoming furious, Tshisekedi strategically picked Sama Lukonde as the new Prime Minister on February 15, 2021. By accepting the job, Lukonde became the face of the Sacred Union and a primary tool used to displace Kabila's loyalists from the state. Within Katanga inner circle, this was viewed as devastating Judas-like betrayal. Sama Lukonde ran the first true Sacred Union government for exactly 3 years. In the December 2023 election, he won a seat as member of the parliament. Congolese law forbade him from being a government minister and an MP at the same time. He resigned as prime minister not as a punishment but as a tactical maneuver to take more secure seats in power. Immediately after the Sacred Union backed him to become the president of the Senate, the absolute point of no return happened on May 23, 2025. Standing at the Senate podium, Sama Lukonde personally led the legislative session that stripped his former boss Joseph Kabila of his lifetime parliamentary immunity. Lukonde personally announced that the Senate had granted permission to prosecute Kabila in a military court for high treason. Today, Lukonde sits at the right hand of President Tshisekedi, completely alienated and cut off from the furious Katanga faction. Following Sama Lukonde's shift to the Senate, President Tshisekedi appointed Judith Suminwa as the country's first female prime minister to lead the next phase of the Sacred Union's plans. As of June 2026, the government and the parliament are entirely focused on a massive, controversial push to modify the national's law to extend the president's time in power. The Sacred Union currently uses a specific 5-step legal process to try and change the constitution. First, Assembly and Senate approval, presidential signing, triggering the initiative, semi-election prep, national public vote. Assembly and Senate approval. On June 9, 2026, the Sacred Union used its 95% supermajority in the National Assembly to pass a brand new referendum bill. The bill has now been sent to Sama Lukonde's Senate. President Tshisekedi must sign the bill into law to give himself the expanded power to call a direct public vote. The president will officially launch the referendum framing the 2006 constitution as outdated and drafted by foreigners. The Electoral Commission will set a voting date, aiming to complete the process before mid-2028. Citizens will vote yes or no to a massive changes, including extending presidential terms from 5 to 7 years and removing 2-term limit. But there is a major legal problem. Article 220 absolutely forbids this. This article states that presidential mandates cannot be changed. To bypass this strict legal lock, the Sacred Union is employing a new strategy. They say they want a brand new constitution. It will be for a third republic. This new constitution erases the past. It will reset the mandate counter to 0. Critics warn that this is a massive legal loophole designed to give Tshisekedi a brand new term. With the Sacred Union holding total control over the government, the remaining opposition leaders, Martin Fayulu, Moise Katumbi, and Deli Sesanga, have been backed into a corner. To survive, they had to stop fighting each other and form a united front called the C64 Coalition. The alliance is named after Article 64 of the Constitution, which states that citizens have a duty to defeat anyone who tries to take power forcefully. Violent protests have now broken out in the streets of Kinshasa. Major clashes erupted outside the parliament. Supporters of C64 came out to oppose the referendum bill. Police used tear gas and fired live ammunition. Heavy fighting broke out between opposition supporters and pro-Tshisekedi groups. The goal of these protesters is to stop the president from changing the constitution. Opposition leaders Martin Fayulu was seriously injured and seen bleeding from his face. Another politician, Deli Sesanga, was shot in the leg. Opposition leaders cite this event as evidence that citizens do not support an extension of the presidential term. Government representatives, however, maintain that the protests do not represent the broader public will. The atmosphere in Kinshasa is volatile and the political war has reached a critical point. Because they do not have enough votes in parliament, they have launched aggressive dead city strikes, Ville Molte, calling on citizens to lock their doors and freeze the economy of Kinshasa. They are heavily backed by the Catholic Church Senko. Catholic bishops have publicly warned that changing the constitution will plunge the DRC back into a dark dictatorship. The church urges that the government should spend its money fixing the horrific humanitarian crisis in the east, where M23 rebels have captured major cities, rather than funding an expensive referendum. To bypass this backlash, the critical threat highlights that President Tshisekedi has actively coup-proofed his administration. He has replaced intensely loyal military generals in charge of the war zones based on their allegiance to the Sacred Union rather than their merits and combat skills. The report highlights that the government of the Sacred Union is not helping the people, but rather acts as a political and legal shield to protect Tshisekedi. What if the protests continue? What if the third public strategy faces legal handles? Critics and opposition figures express deep concern over how current images might influence the political landscape. In Congolese law, there is a concept known as force majeure, an extreme state of national emergency. If the country is at war or facing catastrophic health crisis, the government can legally suspend elections entirely. Analysts suggest that the administration could leverage the ongoing security and health challenges, pointing to the M23 rebels in the east and the persistent threat of Ebola outbreak. Opposition figures note historical precedent, adding that in previous years, specific regions were restricted from voting under health and security pretexts. Critics fear that this playbook could be adapted on a national scale, given that eastern provinces remain under strict state of siege with military generals in charge of major cities. If the constitutional referendum fails to materialize, analysts warn that prolonged insecurity could eventually be used to justify delaying elections. Government officials reject that interpretation, stating that insecurity operations have strictly aimed at protecting territorial integrity. Nonetheless, critics view this environment as a structural fail-safe, worrying that the chaos of war and pledge could serve as mechanism to delay the election indefinitely. The dynamic creates a scenario where absolute power could be maintained without facing an immediate ballot box. Up to this point, our story has focused on politics, political alliances, parliament, and the constitution, and the struggle for power inside the Democratic Republic of Congo. But there is another reason why people around the world pay attention to what happens in Congo. And it has nothing to do with political parties. It has to do with what lies beneath the ground. Because Congo is one of the most resource-rich countries on earth, its land contains vast reserves of minerals used in industries across the world. Copper, cobalt, coltan, gold, tin, and many others. At first, this may sound like ordinary mining products, but they are not. These minerals help power the modern world. Think about the device you are using right now, a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet. Many of the materials inside those devices depend on minerals found in Congo. The same is true for electrical vehicles, for renewable energy system, for communication networks, and for many technologies considered important for the future. What this means is that Congo is not only important because of its size or population. It is important because the modern economy depends on the resources found inside its borders. Think of the global economy as a giant machine. Every mechanism needs parts, and many of those parts begin their journey in places like Congo. That is one reason international interest in the country remains so high. Government watches closely, investors watch closely, mining companies watch closely, technology companies watch closely. Because decisions made inside Congo can affect industries far beyond Africa. This does not mean foreign governments all want the same thing. They do not. Different countries have different priorities. Different companies have different interests. Different investors have different goals. But many of them share one concern: stability. Because businesses invest more easily when conditions are predictable. Supply chains operate more smoothly when transportation is secure. And long-term projects are easier to plan when institutions are stable. That is why political development inside Kinshasa often attracts attention far beyond Central Africa. Leadership matters, security matters, public trust matters, institutional stability matters. Because all of these things help shape the environment in which economic activity takes place. But Congo's importance is not only global, it is also regional. The country sits at the heart of Central Africa. It shares borders with 9 countries. The trade moves across those borders, people move across those borders, and sometimes security challenges move across those borders too. What happens in Congo can affect neighboring countries, and what happens in neighboring countries can affect Congo. That is why regional leaders often pay close attention to the developments inside the country. What this means is that Congo operates at several levels at the same time. It is a national story, a regional story, an African story, and increasingly a global story. Yet, despite all this attention, the country's future will not be decided by minerals wealth alone. Natural resources can create opportunities, but resources by themselves do not guarantee success. Many countries have valuable resources. The bigger question is how those resources are managed, how institution functions, how decisions are made, and how benefits are shared across society. In the end, the future of Congo will depend less on what lies underground and more on what happens above it. The strength of institutions, the quality of leadership, the trust of citizens, and the ability of the state to manage change. Because that is where the next chapter of this story will be written. And that brings us to the most important question of all. What happens next? So, where does all of this lead? That is now the biggest question facing the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Because the story is no longer about how the Sacred Union was created. That part has already happened. The question now is what happens next? And like most political stories, the answer depends on several forces moving at the same time. Politics, economics, security, and public trust, all of them matter. Let's start with politics. Today, the Sacred Union holds a strong position inside the political system. It controls the presidency, it has significant influence in parliament, and it remains the country's largest political alliance. That gives it power, but power comes with expectation. Think of it this way: when people believe you can solve problems, they expect results, not promises results. Citizens want security, jobs, better services, and economic progress. The stronger a government becomes, the more people expect from the government. That is the truth in Congo. It is true almost everywhere else. The second force is the economy. Congo has enormous resources. The country processes some of the most valuable minerals in the world. But resources alone do not create prosperity. Many countries have natural wealth. The challenge is turning that wealth into better life for ordinary citizens. Roads, schools, hospital, electricity, jobs, these are the things people experience in daily life. What this means is that economic growth must eventually be felt beyond statistics and government reports. The third force is security. For many years, parts of East Congo have faced armed conflict and instability. Armed groups remain active, communities remain affected, and security challenges continue to influence national politics. This matters because security affects everything else: investment, trade, development, public confidence. It is difficult to build long-term stability when insecurity remains a daily reality for many communities. The fourth force is public trust. Every political system depends on it. People must believe that institutions matter, that elections matter, that laws matter, and that the rules apply to everyone. Without trust, even strong institutions can struggle. With trust, institutions became stronger. That is why debate about the constitution, election, and the governance often become so important. And their core, they are debates about trust. So what are the possible paths ahead? No one knows the future with certainty. But we can look at the possibility. One possibility is continued stability. Under this scenario, the Sacred Union maintains its influence, institutions remain stable, and political competition continues within existing rules. Another possibility is a greater political tension. Constitutional debates intensify, political disagreements deepen, and competition between different camps becomes more visible. And third possibility is political change. History shows that political alliances rarely last forever. New leaders emerge, new alliances form, old alliances weaken. Politics is always moving. What happens permanently today may look very different a few years from now. What this means is that no political alliance, no leader, and no balance of power should be viewed as permanent. The future remains open, but one thing is already clear. The decisions being made today will shape the country's direction for many years to come. The debates happening now are not only about today. They are about the Congo future generations will inherit. And that brings us to the final chapter of this story. Because after examining the alliances, the institutions, the constitution, and the future, one question remains. What does the rise of the Sacred Union really tells us about the Democratic Republic of the Congo? So, what does this story really tells us? At first glance, this may look like a story about politicians. Felix Tshisekedi, Joseph Kabila, Vital Kamerhe, Jean-Pierre Bemba, Sama Lukonde, Martin Fayulu, Moise Katumbi, and yes, these individuals matters. They have influenced events, made important decisions, built alliances, and shaped the country's direction. But if we stop there, we miss the bigger picture, because this story is not really about personalities. It is about power. How power is gained, how power is used, how power is protected, and how power is challenged. The rise of the Sacred Union changed the political landscape of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It changed alliances, it changed institutions, and it changed who holds influence inside the state. Supporters argue that these changes create greater political stabilities and help government function more effectively. Critics argue that too much power should never gather around single political alliances. Both perspectives continue to shape the national debate, and that debate is unlikely to disappear anytime soon. Because every country must answer the same basic question: how much power should leaders have? What limits should exist? How should power change hands? And who decides when the rules themselves should change? These questions are not unique to Congo. Countries across Africa, across Europe, across Asia, across the Americas face similar debates. But in Congo, those questions carry particular importance because the country stands at a crossroads. The population is growing, its economy is evolving, its political system continues to change, and its natural resources make it important far beyond its borders. What happens in Congo matters to Congolese citizens. It matters to neighboring countries. It matters to business investors, governments, and industries across the world. Yet, despite all the international attention, the future of Congo will ultimately be decided inside Congo itself. Not by headlines, not by social media, not by foreign commentary, but by institution, by leadership, by political choices, and by the Congolese people. What this means is that the country's future has not yet been written. The story is still unfolding. The constitutional debate continues. Political competition continues. New alliances may emerge. Old alliances may weaken. New leaders may rise, and new challenges will almost certainly appear. That is how politics work. It is always moving, always changing, always evolving. But one conclusion can already be made. The rise of the Sacred Union has has become one of the most important political developments in modern Congolese history. Whether it ultimately becomes a lasting political force, a stepping stone, a deeper reforms, or the beginning of another political realignment remains to be seen. For now, our task is not to predict, it is to understand. To understand how power works, how institution evolves, and how political decisions shape the future of the nation. Because once we understand the system, we can better understand the events unfolding around us. And that is the story of the Sacred Union. Not simply a story about politics, but a story about power, institutions, and the future direction of one of Africa's most important countries. Beyond the headlines, this is the DRC reality on the ground. This is a Free Media Network Lens. I am Bella. Thanks for watching.